I stood in the glass-walled lobby of NovaTech, holding a box of imported macarons and 2 first-class tickets to Paris for Valentine's Day. But the champagne popping in the center of the room was not for me. My husband was on one knee, sliding a 5-carat diamond onto his chief executive officer's finger while the entire office cheered. He pulled her close and declared she was the only woman fit to stand beside him, unlike his useless stay-at-home wife. I did not cry, and I did not scream. I just turned around, walked out the glass doors, and made a single phone call that would bankrupt him before dinner. I am Madeline, 33 years old, and until that afternoon, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your loyalty repaid with absolute betrayal. Growing up in the heart of Silicon Valley, I learned early on that the tech world was a ruthless place. But I never expected that ruthlessness to reside inside my own home. NovaTech was currently the hottest tech startup in California, and my husband Preston was the celebrated chief technology officer. For the past 8 years, I had played the role of the quiet, supportive spouse. I was the background character who baked artisanal sourdough bread, curated our Palo Alto estate, and smiled politely at corporate dinners. Preston loved telling his colleagues that I was just a simple homebody who did not understand the fast-paced world of technology and venture capital. I let him tell that story because his ego was incredibly fragile, and I loved him enough to let him shine in the spotlight. February 14th was supposed to be our grand celebration. We had barely seen each other for the past 6 months because of the upcoming initial public offering. The NovaTech IPO was scheduled to launch on Wall Street tomorrow morning, and Preston had practically been living at the office to prepare. I wanted to surprise him with something unforgettable. I bought his favorite Pierre Hermé macarons and booked a romantic luxury getaway to Paris so we could finally reconnect after he rang the bell at the stock exchange. The lobby of NovaTech was a sleek masterpiece of modern architecture with exposed brick and massive screens displaying their rising valuation. I swiped my spouse access badge and rode the private elevator to the top-floor executive suite. When the silver doors slid open, I expected to find Preston hunched over his laptop, looking stressed and exhausted. Instead, a massive wall of sound hit me. Upbeat music, loud laughter, and the sharp pop of champagne corks echoed across the open-concept workspace. I navigated carefully through the crowd of developers and marketing associates who were too busy cheering and drinking to notice me standing at the very edge of the room. In the center of the bullpen beneath a massive digital countdown clock ticking down to tomorrow's IPO stood Preston. He was wearing the custom-tailored suit I had bought for his last birthday, but he was not looking at the clock or celebrating a business milestone. He was down on one knee, holding a velvet box open toward the sky. Standing above him, looking flawless in a crimson designer dress, was Serena, the chief executive officer of NovaTech. I froze completely in place. My fingers gripped the small pink gift box so tightly the cardboard began to crush inward. Preston took Serena by the hand, and his voice echoed through the room, clear and full of arrogant confidence. "Serena, you have been the absolute driving force behind this company and the driving force in my personal life. We built NovaTech together from the ground up. You are the only woman fit to stand beside me. Unlike my useless stay-at-home wife who just bakes bread all day, you are the true queen of this empire. I want to build my massive future with my equal. Will you marry me?" The crowd erupted into wild applause and cheering. Serena threw her arms around his neck, shouting yes, and pulling him into a passionate, deeply intimate kiss. My husband, the man I had built an entire life with, was publicly securing his future with another woman, while completely humiliating me to his entire staff. My chest tightened uncomfortably, but I refused to shed a single tear. Preston thought I was just a simple housewife, because that was the narrative we agreed upon years ago when his startup was failing. What he conveniently forgot, and what Serena never even knew, was that 8 years ago, sitting at my kitchen island, I wrote the proprietary base code that NovaTech was built upon. Preston was just a charismatic face I put out front to secure the initial meetings because the industry favored loud, confident men. And when they desperately needed funding to keep the lights on, I did not just bake cookies. I quietly operated as a high-level venture capitalist. I am the sole limited partner of Apex Ventures. I am the blind trust that provided 100% of NovaTech's funding. Preston thought Apex was some faceless corporate entity run by old money in New York. He had absolutely no idea he was sleeping next to his sole investor every single night. The crowd continued to cheer, their glasses raised high, completely oblivious to the woman standing in the shadows holding useless flight tickets. I looked down at the crushed macarons in my hand. I walked over to the nearest sleek metal trash receptacle and dropped the box inside. The gentle thud was entirely drowned out by Serena showing off her massive new diamond ring to her assistants. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the private elevator. My posture was perfectly straight. I did not run away. I did not hide my face in shame. I stepped into the elevator and watched the silver doors slide shut, cutting off the sickening sound of my husband's ultimate betrayal. The California sun was bright and warm as I walked out to my car, but my blood felt like pure ice. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the leather steering wheel, letting the harsh reality of the last 10 minutes wash over me. Preston wanted a corporate queen. He wanted an equal who understood business. He was about to find out exactly how unequal we truly were. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed a highly secure number I rarely used. My wealth manager answered on the second ring. "Hello, Madeline, what can I do for you today?" My voice was dangerously calm and steady when I replied. "Activate the capital call freeze immediately. I want to withdraw Apex Ventures' 83% backing from NovaTech. Pull the funding right now." The wrought iron gates of my Palo Alto estate parted silently as my car approached. Preston had parked his silver Porsche Cayenne at a crooked angle across the pristine driveway, leaving thick black tire marks on the manicured edge of the lawn. He was pacing furiously across the flagstone porch while his mother Beatrice stood by the massive oak front door, repeatedly jabbing her finger into the doorbell. I put the car in park and took a slow, deliberate breath. I smoothed the skirt of my dress, grabbed my handbag, and stepped out into the warm California evening. Preston did not even wait for me to close my car door before he started shouting. He marched down the driveway with his hands thrown up in the air, his face a mask of furious indignation. "What is wrong with you, Madeline?" he yelled, his voice echoing across the quiet, upscale neighborhood. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I was standing in front of the event coordinators at the Pierre Hotel, finalizing the details for the post-initial public offering gala, and my black card was declined. A $20,000 catering deposit declined in front of my entire executive team. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I had to call my assistant to put it on her corporate card. I locked my car with the sharp beep and started walking up the driveway, completely ignoring his tantrum. Beatrice strutted down the porch steps to join her son. She was wearing a tailored Chanel suit and a heavy diamond tennis necklace that Preston had bought her last Christmas using funds from the very bank accounts I had just frozen. "You are acting like a spoiled child." Madeline Beatrice snapped, her voice dripping with the familiar condescension she had used on me for 8 years. "My son is 24 hours away from the biggest financial triumph of his life, and you are throwing a jealous fit over money. You should be on your knees thanking him for providing you with this magnificent house and this luxurious life. Instead, you are freezing his accounts like a petty, vindictive housewife. Unlock those cards immediately so he can focus on his company." I stopped walking and simply looked at them. They stood side by side, a wall of unearned arrogance. "You were a little busy in the lobby today, Preston," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I did not want to interrupt your special moment." Preston froze. The angry red flush on his face drained away, leaving him pale for a fraction of a second before his charismatic chief technology officer persona snapped right back into place. He let out a loud, exasperated sigh and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He stepped closer to me, dropping his voice into the gentle, patronizing tone he used when explaining complex software to naive investors. "Madeline, You misunderstood what you saw, he said, shaking his head with a sad little smile. It was a public relations stunt. Serena and I staged that entire proposal for the marketing team. We needed a massive viral moment to show absolute unity between the founders before the opening bell tomorrow. The investors want a powerful power couple narrative to drive the stock price up. It is entirely fake, Madeline. I did it for us. I did it to secure our future, and you just tried to sabotage my entire career because you are too insecure to trust your own husband. It was a masterful and manipulative lie. If I were the naive baking housewife he thought I was, I might have believed him. I might have apologized and begged for his forgiveness. But I was the one who wrote the algorithms he took credit for. I knew when a system was corrupted. A public relations stunt, I repeated, letting the words hang in the evening air. So slipping a 5-carat flawless diamond onto the finger of the woman who has been calling me a domestic burden behind my back for 3 years was just corporate strategy. Beatrice scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest. Serena is a brilliant chief executive officer, she declared. She understands the immense sacrifices required for greatness. She does not sit around the house all day waiting for a man to hand her an allowance. You simply do not understand high-level business, Madeline. You never have. You need to apologize to Preston and fix whatever you did to the bank accounts right now before you ruin his initial public offering. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that made Preston take a cautious half-step back. I did not argue with them. I did not scream or demand explanations. I walked past them up the porch steps and retrieved my keys from my handbag. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open. I did not step inside. Instead, I reached into the hidden drawer of the entryway console table, where I kept my secure legal documents. I pulled out a thick manila envelope that my lawyers had drafted weeks ago, when I first noticed discrepancies in Preston's offshore server logs. I had waited for the absolute confirmation of his betrayal to use them. Today in the NovaTech lobby, he gave me all the confirmation I needed. I turned around and walked back down the steps, stopping right in front of Preston. I held out the envelope. He snatched it from my hands with a heavy, arrogant sigh. "Thank you," he muttered, clearly assuming it contained the passcodes to unfreeze his bank accounts. He ripped open the flap and pulled out the crisp white documents. His eyes scanned the first page and his jaw went completely slack. "This is not bank information," he whispered, staring at the bold legal header. "No, it is not," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Those are divorce papers, and the document behind them is a 30-day emergency eviction notice." Beatrice let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. "Eviction notice," she shrieked. "You cannot evict my son from his own house. You have no income. He pays for this estate." I looked directly into Beatrice's eyes and delivered the truth that would shatter their carefully constructed reality. "Preston does not own this house, Beatrice. His name is not on the deed, and it never was. This property is owned by a private investment entity called Apex Ventures, the exact same trust that has been secretly funding NovaTech for 8 years. And as the sole owner and operator of Apex Ventures, I am telling you both to get off my porch right now." My name is Madeline, and as I stood on my front porch, watching my husband process the fact that I was his sole investor, I felt absolutely nothing but cold resolve. Preston stared at the eviction notice in his hands, and then stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant chief technology officer, who had just proposed to his chief executive officer an hour ago, was entirely gone. In his place stood a man whose carefully curated reality was collapsing in real time. Beatrice was the first to recover. The heavy diamond tennis necklace around her throat caught the evening light as her face contorted into an ugly mask of rage. She lunged forward, trying to wedge her expensive leather shoe into the doorway. "You are a lying, manipulative psychopath," she screamed, spraying spittle into the air. "Apex Ventures is a multi-billion-dollar firm in New York. You are just a pathetic housewife who bakes bread and leeches off my son. You hacked his bank accounts and printed a fake document to scare us." I did not raise my voice. I simply looked down at her foot, blocking my threshold. "Remove your shoe." Beatrice or I will close this solid oak door directly on your ankle." She gasped and yanked her foot back instinctively. I stepped backward inside the foyer and slammed the heavy door shut, locking the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. Instantly, Preston began pounding his fists against the wood. The heavy thuds echoed through my quiet foyer. "Madeline," he yelled, his voice muffled but frantic. "Madeline, open this door right now. You are having a manic episode. You cannot do this to me. The initial public offering is tomorrow." I walked over to the digital security panel on the wall and pressed the intercom button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to move your Porsche off my property, Preston," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the exterior speakers. "If your tires are still on my driveway when the timer hits 0, I am calling the police and pressing charges for criminal trespassing." I watched the high-definition security feed on the screen. Preston raised his fist to strike the door again, but Beatrice grabbed his arm. She was visibly panicked now, realizing the very real threat of police arriving on the eve of his historic Wall Street debut. She dragged her screaming son down the porch steps and shoved him toward his vehicle. I watched them peel out of the driveway, leaving dark rubber marks on the pristine concrete. The house fell into absolute silence. I walked into the massive chef kitchen and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I sat at the marble island, where 8 years ago I had coded the foundational architecture for NovaTech. I had structured Apex Ventures through a labyrinth of proxy lawyers and blind trusts, specifically to protect Preston. His masculinity was incredibly fragile. He needed to feel like the brilliant provider, and I had loved him enough to orchestrate the illusion. Now that illusion was weaponized against him. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the capitalization table of NovaTech, ensuring every restrictive covenant I had written into their funding agreements was locked tight. The next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, a sharp knock broke the silence of the house. I opened the door to find a man in a rumpled suit holding a thick stack of legal documents. He asked if I was Madeline. When I confirmed, he shoved the papers into my hands and walked away. I took my coffee out to the patio and flipped through the heavy packet. Preston had gone on a desperate offensive. It was an ex parte emergency court summons. He had officially filed a petition for dissolution of marriage at the stroke of business hours, and his demands were staggering. Reading the legal filing was like reading a masterclass in gaslighting. Preston was petitioning the California Family Court for $50,000 a month in emergency pendente light spousal support. He was demanding exclusive use of the Palo Alto estate. His lawyer had drafted a vicious narrative claiming I was a mentally unstable, unemployed dependent who had suffered a sudden psychotic break. The document claimed I was subjecting him to severe financial and emotional abuse by illegally hacking and freezing his hard-earned assets. He explicitly stated that I was trying to extort him on the eve of his company going public to ruin his reputation. There was absolutely no mention of his public proposal to Serena or the 5-carat diamond ring he had purchased with my money. He was painting himself as the brilliant victim of a hysterical wife. I laughed out loud, taking a sip of my dark roast coffee. He actually believed he could use the family court system to override a corporate capital freeze. He still did not believe I was Apex. He thought I was just throwing a tantrum and committing a breach of fiduciary duty. Before I could turn to the next page of the absurd lawsuit, my phone chimed loudly on the glass patio table. It was an automated corporate alert directly from the NovaTech executive portal. Serena had just issued a mandatory summons for an emergency board of directors meeting scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon. I opened the attached agenda. Serena was moving to formally expel the rogue investor known as Apex Ventures from the board. She was proposing the issuance of new Series B preferred shares to secure emergency bridge funding from a white knight investor. She intended to execute a highly dilutive financing round to wipe out my 83% equity position and save the initial public offering. It was a bold, aggressive corporate defense strategy. But Serena was completely unaware that the senior secured debt Apex held contained absolute anti-dilution clauses and supermajority voting rights. They could not issue a single share of new stock without the physical signature of the Apex chairman. They wanted a boardroom war. They wanted to expel the faceless New York investor who was ruining their perfect Wall Street debut. I put my coffee mug down on the table and stood up. I walked upstairs to my master closet and pulled out my sharpest tailored charcoal suit. I had 3 hours before the board meeting started. It was time to show my husband and his mistress exactly what the chairman of Apex Ventures looked like. The boardroom descended into absolute chaos as the digital screens went black. The heavy LED lights above us flickered violently before the building's emergency backup generators kicked in, bathing the mahogany table in a harsh industrial glare. Preston stood at the far end of the room, bathed in the artificial light, wearing a smile of pure, venomous triumph. He truly believed he had executed the perfect corporate murder. He thought blinding my digital access would paralyze me. I did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I picked up my useless bricked smartphone from the table and turned to Arthur, who was already pulling a fresh legal pad from his briefcase. "Keep them in this room," I whispered, my voice barely carrying over the panicked shouting of the board members. "Threaten them with immediate federal injunctions. Threaten them with individual liability. Do whatever it takes, but do not let Preston leave this building." Arthur gave a single curt nod. I turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. The moment the elevator doors closed, my mind shifted from corporate strategy to raw tactical survival. Preston locking me out of the NovaTech mainframe was a distraction. The offshore transfer was a diversion. He did not just want to hold the current compiled software hostage, he needed to erase history. 8 years ago, sitting at our kitchen island, I had written the origin code. Every line of the foundational architecture, every predictive modeling algorithm, every cryptographic signature that proved the intellectual property belonged to me was stored on the localized Genesis servers in the basement of our Palo Alto estate. If Preston wiped those physical drives, the digital footprint of my creation would vanish. It would become his word against mine, and he was the public-facing chief technology officer. He would claim the offshore code as his own original work, and I would be left with a multi-billion-dollar shell company holding zero assets. I sprinted through the underground parking garage, ignoring the shouting security guards. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my car and tore out into the Silicon Valley traffic. The drive down the 101 freeway was a blur of calculated, reckless speed. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Preston was arrogant, but he was fast. I had a narrow window before his remote malware completely devoured a decade of my life's work. My tires screeched against the pristine concrete of my driveway. I threw the car into park, leaving the engine running and the door wide open. The moment I stepped onto the front porch, the sheer scale of Preston's cyber hijack became terrifyingly clear. He had weaponized our entire smart home infrastructure. The automated security blinds were snapping up and down in a violent, erratic rhythm. The exterior alarms were blaring a deafening, high-pitched siren designed to disorient intruders. Inside, the heavy oak front door was completely unlatched. The climate control system was roaring, blasting freezing air through the vents, while the smart lights flickered in a blinding strobe effect. He was using his legacy administrative access to turn the house into a funhouse of sensory overload, deliberately trying to slow me down. I kicked off my stiletto heels, leaving them on the entryway rug, and sprinted barefoot across the freezing hardwood floor. I bypassed the chaotic living room and headed straight for the basement stairs. The entrance to my private server room was secured by a biometric steel door. The fingerprint scanner was flashing a hard, angry red. Preston had remotely rewritten my localized access protocols, locking me out of my own physical sanctuary. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. Mount swung it backward and smashed the heavy metal cylinder directly into the emergency glass release panel. The glass shattered. I slammed my fist onto the manual override button. The heavy steel door hissed open, and a wave of blistering heat washed over me. The basement felt like a furnace. The industrial cooling fans on the server racks were screaming, operating at maximum capacity to handle the massive processing load of a remote wipe. 4 massive monitors dominated the concrete wall. They were a terrifying sea of rapidly executing command lines cascading down the screens in bright red text. A highly sophisticated remote wiping worm, was actively chewing through my localized network partitions. Preston was not just deleting files, he was executing a military-grade cryptographic overwrite. He was systematically replacing every byte of my original source code with randomized data, ensuring no forensic recovery team on Earth could ever salvage the intellectual property. I lunged for the primary terminal, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard to initiate an emergency kill switch. A mocking digital prompt flashed in the center of the screen. Access denied. Administrative override required. He was watching the network traffic in real time. He had completely locked the software interface. I could not beat him in a digital war while he controlled the network architecture. I had to sever the hardware. I abandoned the keyboard and scrambled on my hands and knees behind the massive, towering server racks. The heat radiating from the machines was suffocating. Dust and ozone burned my lungs. I grabbed the thick bundle of fiber optic and Ethernet cables connecting the primary RAID array to the external network node. I ripped them out of the wall with brutal force. The thick plastic clips shattered, scattering across the concrete floor. The remote connection died instantly, but the primary monitors were still blazing red. The worm was already localized. It was executing its final commands directly on the internal drives. I scrambled toward the secondary backup vault, a reinforced titanium casing housing 3 solid-state drives containing the raw Genesis code. The status lights on the vault were blinking rapidly from green to amber. The malware had breached the physical partition. I ignored the blaring warning alarms, grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench, and smashed the glass casing of the vault. I reached in and grabbed the first drive. The indicator light went dead black the moment my fingers touched it. Wiped. I grabbed the second drive, ripping it from its bay. A spark flew from the connector pins. The data corrupted mid-transfer. There was only one drive left, the tertiary fragment backup. It did not contain the complete system, but it held roughly 40% of the architectural drafts and the time-stamped cryptographic signatures. It was enough to prove my authorship in federal court. The light was flashing a rapid, frantic red. The overwrite was seconds away from destroying it. I jammed my hand into the blistering hot metal casing, wrapped my fingers around the final drive, and violently yanked it free. The connecting pins snapped with a loud crunch. The monitors instantly went black. The cooling fans wound down to a low, dying mechanical whine. The server array was entirely bricked. Millions of dollars of hardware and a decade of digital history had just been reduced to useless scrap metal. I slumped back against the cold concrete floor, gasping for air. My suit was covered in dust and my hands were scraped and bleeding from the sharp edges of the server racks. But I clutched the single, warm, solid-state drive tightly against my chest. Preston thought he had erased my existence. He was wrong. I had saved a fragment. The silence in the ruined basement was heavy and absolute. Then a sharp, piercing ring shattered the quiet. It was not coming from my dead smartphone. The sound was muffled, coming from a hollowed-out utility box hidden behind a framed circuit schematic on the far wall. It was a prepaid, untraceable burner phone. I had purchased the device 3 years ago and locked it away strictly for a catastrophic emergency. Nobody in the world knew that number. The ringing was insistent. I stood up, walked over to the utility box, and pulled the cheap plastic device from the shelf. The caller ID was a scrambled sequence of zeros. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. The voice on the other end was mechanically altered, distorted into a low metallic pitch. "Do not connect to the Wi-Fi," the disguised voice commanded. "Bring your drives to the diner on 4th Street in 20 minutes. Come alone." The line went dead. I shoved the burner phone into my jacket pocket alongside the salvaged solid-state drive. I did not bother looking back at the smoking ruins of my basement servers. I ran to my car, threw it into drive, and sped toward the diner on 4th Street. The diner was a relic from another era, sandwiched between an abandoned laundromat and a discount auto parts store. The neon sign above the entrance flickered violently, buzzing with a faulty electrical current. I parked in the shadows at the edge of the lot, checking my rearview mirror out of pure paranoia before stepping out into the damp evening air. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The evening rush had not yet started, leaving the diner mostly empty save for a few exhausted truck drivers at the counter. I scanned the worn vinyl booths along the back wall. Sitting in the darkest corner, partially obscured by a structural column, was a figure in a tailored black overcoat. He raised a cup of black coffee, taking a slow, measured sip. It was DeAndre, my brother-in-law, Brittany's husband. I froze halfway across the black and white checkered floor. DeAndre was the absolute last person I expected to see. Brittany was Preston's sister, meaning DeAndre was deeply embedded in the exact toxic family structure that was currently trying to destroy my life. But as I met his eyes across the diner, I saw no hostility. I saw sharp, calculating intelligence. DeAndre was a brilliant cybersecurity architect who ran his own highly lucrative consulting firm. He was also a successful African-American man, forced to exist within Preston and Brittany's insufferable country club ecosystem. For years, I had watched Preston subject DeAndre to relentless, smiling microaggressions. Preston constantly referred to DeAndre as the family IT guy, loudly asking him to fix the Wi-Fi router at Thanksgiving dinners, completely ignoring the fact that DeAndre built digital fortresses for international banks. Brittany was no better, constantly diminishing her own husband's success to elevate her brother's ego. DeAndre set his coffee down and gestured to the empty seat across from him. I slid into the booth, my heart hammering against my ribs. Before I could say a word, DeAndre reached into his overcoat and dropped a sleek metallic mesh pouch onto the laminate table. It was a Faraday bag. "Put the drive and the burner phone in here right now," DeAndre commanded, his voice low and completely devoid of warmth. "The bag blocks all electromagnetic fields. As long as your hardware is exposed, Preston's tracking algorithms are hunting for the MAC address." I did not hesitate. I pulled the warm, solid-state drive and the cheap plastic burner phone from my pocket and dropped them into the pouch. DeAndre sealed it shut, smoothing his hand over the heavy Velcro closure. "How did you get this number?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know about the drive?" "Because I do not trust a single person in your husband's family," DeAndre replied, leaning back against the red vinyl. "I have been monitoring the network traffic routing through Preston's primary servers for months. I know his digital footprint better than he does. When he initiated that massive encrypted data migration to the Cayman Islands this morning, it triggered several automated alerts on my end. You watched him steal NovaTech's source code." "I watched him try," DeAndre corrected, a faint, razor-sharp smile appearing on his face. "Preston is arrogant. He thinks writing flashy, predictive algorithms makes him a god. But he does not understand raw network architecture. When he tried to execute the remote wipe on your home servers, I intercepted the command packet. I bottlenecked the bandwidth routing to your Palo Alto IP address." My eyes widened in realization. The server wipe in my basement had felt impossibly slow for a military-grade malware worm. The slight delay in the physical overwrite had given me the exact handful of seconds I needed to smash the vault and extract the final backup drive. "You throttled his connection," I whispered. "You gave me the time to pull the physical hardware." DeAndre nodded slowly. "I throttled it just enough to keep the malware from instantly frying the secondary sectors. If I had blocked the attack completely, Preston would have known someone was inside his network. I had to let him think the wipe was successful. To him, those servers are completely bricked. He believes your Genesis code is nothing but ash." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, gripping the edge of the table. "Brittany is his sister. If Preston secures absolute control of NovaTech, the entire family benefits." DeAndre let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Family. Do you know what it takes to sit at their dining table year after year, listening to Preston talk down to me like I am some diversity hire pulling Ethernet cables, watching Brittany smile and nod while her brother disrespects the very firm that pays for her designer lifestyle? They look at me and they see a prop, a convenient accessory they can parade around when it suits their progressive narrative, only to treat me like the hired help the moment the doors close." He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. The anger radiating from him was palpable, a cold, focused fury that matched my own. I am done playing nice with these people, Maddie DeAndre said softly. Preston thinks he is the smartest man in the room. He thinks he can crush you, steal your life's work, and walk away untouched. I am going to help you burn his empire straight to the ground. I exhaled a shaky breath, feeling the first genuine surge of hope since this nightmare began. I have a fragment of the raw code on that drive, I told him, pointing at the Faraday bag. It is not the full architecture, but it contains the time-stamped cryptographic signatures. It proves I wrote the original algorithms 8 years ago. Arthur can use it to file a federal injunction and freeze the initial public offering tomorrow morning. DeAndre shook his head. Freezing the IPO is a corporate dispute. It is a civil matter. Preston will tie you up in litigation for a decade while he bleeds the company dry. We are not going to sue him, Maddie. We are going to send him to federal prison. He reached down into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a matte black, heavily encrypted laptop. He flipped the screen open, bypassed a complex biometric lock, and angled the display toward me. The screen was filled with thousands of lines of dense transactional code, cross-referenced with offshore banking, routing numbers. I frowned, tracing the lines of data with my eyes. What is this? I told you I was monitoring his network traffic, DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I was not just looking at the remote wipe commands. I dug straight into the offshore encryption tunnel he used to hide your software. I decrypted the data packets he sent to Serena's shell company in the Caymans. He tapped a specific sequence of highlighting text on the screen. They aren't just stealing your software, Maddie. Look at these offshore ledgers. Preston and Serena have been using the code to launder money for 3 years. The heavy glass door of the diner swung shut behind me, cutting off the sharp scent of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I stepped out into the freezing night air, clutching the metallic Faraday bag tightly against my ribs. The parking lot was desolate and covered in a thin layer of winter frost. It was illuminated only by the buzzing, half-broken neon sign of the diner and a single flickering street lamp near the alleyway. DeAndre had slipped out through the kitchen exit several minutes earlier to retrieve his vehicle, leaving me to walk to my car alone in the dark. My mind was still spinning violently from the digital evidence DeAndre had just exposed on his encrypted laptop. Preston was not just a corporate thief trying to steal my code. He was a federal criminal. DeAndre had shown me the offshore routing numbers, the hidden shell companies, and the massive streams of illicit funds washing directly through the NovaTech architecture. Preston and Serena had been using my proprietary predictive algorithms to launder money for international syndicates for 3 years. I needed to get these drives and this information to Arthur immediately so we could contact the authorities. I took 2 hurried steps toward my sedan before a sleek black luxury SUV rolled silently into the parking lot, blocking my path completely. The high beams flashed on, blinding me for a split second. The rear passenger doors opened simultaneously. 2 figures stepped out into the harsh white light. Madeline, we have been looking absolutely everywhere for you. The condescending voice belonged to Richard Preston's father. He smoothed the lapels of his immaculate cashmere overcoat, looking around the gritty, cracked pavement of the parking lot with blatant, performative disgust. Beside him stood Brittany Preston's younger sister. She shivered in a designer trench coat, glaring at me as if I were a piece of trash stuck to the bottom of her expensive leather boots. "We need to have a very serious family conversation," Richard stated. He stepped forward purposefully, trapping me between the heavy front bumper of my car and the cold brick wall of the diner. "This is an intervention." Maddie Brittany added, her voice dripping with a weaponized artificial sympathy that made my stomach turn. "We are all just so incredibly worried about your mental state. Preston called us in tears this afternoon. He said you completely lost your mind and violently destroyed your own basement servers in a fit of rage." "Get out of my way, Richard," I demanded, tightening my grip on the Faraday bag. "I have absolutely nothing to say to either of you, and I am leaving." Richard chuckled. It was a cold, dry sound that perfectly mirrored his son's arrogant bark. "You are going to listen to exactly what I have to say, Madeline, because right now you are standing on the edge of a very steep cliff, and I am the only person holding a parachute." He reached inside his tailored coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slapped it down hard against the hood of my car. "It is truly a tragic thing," Richard said, shaking his head with mock sorrow. "Early onset schizophrenia. It explains so much about the recent friction in your marriage. The sudden extreme paranoia, the erratic behavior, the violent delusions that led you to destroy millions of dollars of company hardware in a manic episode today." My blood ran cold. I stared at the blank manila envelope. "What are you talking about?" Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "Do not play dumb with us, Maddie. We have the medical records right here. Fully authenticated psychiatric evaluations detailing your severe mental decline over the past 12 months. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you have been unfit to make rational financial or legal decisions for the better part of a year." "You forged medical records," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper as the reality of their scheme set in. "You paid someone to manufacture a psychiatric history so you could have me declared mentally incompetent." "We are simply protecting the family legacy," Richard countered, stepping so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Preston is the brilliant face of NovaTech. He is the mind driving this initial public offering. If the board of directors sees these tragic medical evaluations, your 83% ownership stake will be instantly placed into a medical conservatorship. And as your loving, devoted husband, Preston will naturally be appointed as your sole legal guardian. He will assume total control of your voting rights and your finances by tomorrow morning." "You will lose absolutely everything," Brittany sneered, leaning in with a vicious, triumphant smile. "You honestly thought you could outsmart a genius like my brother? Preston built this entire empire from the ground up. He is a visionary. You were just riding his coattails, pretending to be some tech prodigy. The board will take one look at these documents and realize you are just a sick, unstable housewife who needs to be locked away in a facility for her own good." As she spoke, the driver's side window of the luxury SUV rolled down. DeAndre sat behind the wheel. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead on the dark street, his face completely blank and unreadable. DeAndre held a master's degree in cybersecurity and ran a consulting firm that serviced the Department of Defense, yet his wife treated him like a glorified errand boy. "DeAndre, keep the heat running," Brittany barked over her shoulder, not even bothering to look at her husband. "And do not touch the radio settings again. Just sit there and keep the engine warm. Let the adults handle the real business for once." She turned back to me, dismissing DeAndre as easily as one would dismiss a hired chauffeur. That was exactly how this toxic family operated. They consumed people. They belittled anyone who did not fit their narrow narrative of superiority, weaponizing their wealth and privilege to crush outsiders. Richard tapped a manicured finger against the manila envelope. "You have a very simple choice, Madeline. We can release these psychiatric records to the board and the press tonight. The media will absolutely devour the story of the crazy founder losing her mind on the eve of a massive IPO. You will be institutionalized against your will, and Preston will take the company anyway." Or I asked, forcing my voice to tremble. I let my shoulders slump forward, playing exactly the role they expected to see. The terrified, defeated, and helpless victim. "Or you sign this transfer agreement right now," Richard said, pulling a sleek silver pen and a legal contract from the envelope. "You voluntarily surrender all your shares to Preston tonight. You walk away quietly with a modest severance package. We bury these medical records forever, and you get to keep your freedom." I looked down at the contract resting on the hood of my car. I forced my hands to shake visibly. I let a single calculated tear slip down my cheek. I looked up at Richard with wide, panicked eyes, breathing heavily. "Please, Richard," I begged, my voice breaking perfectly. "Do not do this to me. You cannot release those records to the press. It will destroy my entire life. Please, I will do whatever you want. Just do not show them to the board." Richard smiled, a grotesque display of absolute power. He held the silver pen out to me. "Then sign the paper, Madeline. Be a good girl and give my son his company back." I slowly reached out, my trembling fingers hovering over the expensive pen. But instead of looking at the contract, my gaze shifted past Richard's shoulder. Through the tinted glass of the idling SUV, I looked directly at DeAndre. He slowly turned his head to meet my eyes. He did not smile. He did not blink. He simply raised one hand in the shadows of the dark cabin and tapped his index finger twice against his ear. A highly sensitive directional microphone sat on the passenger seat next to him, glowing with a solid green recording light. He had captured every single word of the extortion attempt in crystal-clear high-definition audio. The green recording light on DeAndre's dashboard blinked off. That tiny flash of color was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I gave him a single sharp nod of gratitude before turning my back on Richard and Brittany. I slid into my car, locked the doors, and drove away, leaving them standing in the freezing parking lot, completely unaware that their entire extortion attempt was now resting safely on an encrypted audio file. I did not go back to the Palo Alto house. I navigated the dark streets and headed straight for the financial district. My destination was the towering glass monolith of Vance and Sterling. They were the most aggressive, ruthless corporate litigation firm on the West Coast. They did not settle disputes. They destroyed opposing counsel. I needed a shark, and Marcus Vance was the apex predator of Silicon Valley. Despite the late hour, the firm was buzzing with activity. I bypassed the receptionist and used my recognized status as the founder of NovaTech to demand an immediate audience with Marcus. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in his corner office overlooking the city skyline. I placed the Faraday bag on his mahogany desk. I pulled out the solid-state drive containing the fragment of my original source code and the encrypted flash drive DeAndre had handed me through his car window before I drove off. Marcus listened to the audio file without changing his expression. He heard Richard explicitly threatening to leak forged medical records. He heard Brittany bragging about Preston stealing my company. And most importantly, he heard DeAndre detailing the exact offshore routing numbers Preston and Serena were using to launder syndicate money through the NovaTech architecture. When the recording finished, Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. He smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that promised absolute devastation. "This is not just corporate espionage, Madeline. This is a massive federal racketeering case," Marcus stated, tapping his expensive pen against the desk. "We file a federal injunction at dawn. We present the money laundering evidence directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. The initial public offering will be frozen immediately. By noon tomorrow, Preston will be in federal custody and you will regain total control of your board." I let out a shaky breath, feeling the crushing weight of the past 24 hours finally begin to lift. "Do it. File everything." Marcus nodded to his paralegal, who was standing quietly by the door. "We require a $200,000 retainer to initiate an emergency federal action of this magnitude." I opened my designer bag and pulled out my primary black card. I handed it to the paralegal with steady hands. "Charge it. Do whatever it takes to bury him." The paralegal swiped the heavy metal card through a secure terminal on the desk. A harsh electronic beep echoed in the quiet office. She frowned and ran it again. The same jarring beep followed. "It is declining," she said, looking at the screen with confusion. "That is impossible," I replied, pulling out my secondary platinum card and sliding it across the desk. "I have over $10 million in liquid capital in that primary account alone. Try this one." The paralegal swiped the second card. Declined. She quickly typed my name into their secure financial verification database. Her face went completely pale. She turned the monitor so Marcus could see the screen. Marcus frowned and typed a few commands of his own, accessing the county court records. The triumphant smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of grim professional detachment. "Your accounts are not just declining, Madeline. They are completely frozen. Every single personal and joint account attached to your Social Security number has been locked under an emergency judicial hold." Marcus turned the monitor toward me. I stared at the glowing screen. A county judge had approved an ex parte emergency injunction exactly 45 minutes ago. The petitioner was Preston. The grounds for the injunction were listed as severe mental incapacitation and immediate threat to corporate assets. How could a judge grant that without my presence? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "He cannot just freeze my life based on a verbal accusation." "He did not use a verbal accusation," Marcus said, pointing to a PDF attachment on the screen. He used a legally binding medical power of attorney combined with an emergency psychiatric evaluation signed by a licensed physician. I stared at the scanned signature on the power of attorney document. My breath caught in my throat. It was my signature. But it was not from today. It was from 5 years ago. During the second year of building NovaTech, I had worked 100-hour weeks coding the foundational algorithms until my body simply gave out. I had collapsed from severe exhaustion and dehydration. I was hospitalized for 3 days on an intravenous drip. While I was in the hospital bed, Preston had brought me a stack of paperwork. He claimed it was standard procedure, a temporary medical proxy, just in case my condition worsened. I had trusted my husband. I had signed it blindly. He kept it. For 5 years, Preston had kept that document locked away. He had altered the date stamps and combined it with the fake psychiatric evaluations Richard had threatened me with at the diner. He presented the package to a late-night emergency judge, claiming I was currently experiencing a violent manic episode and was attempting to destroy a billion-dollar company. The judge had granted Preston absolute conservatorship over my finances and my shares to protect the impending IPO. "We can fight this," I said, gripping the edge of the desk. "You just heard the recording. You know the medical records are forged. You have the proof." Marcus closed his laptop. The ruthless shark I had hired just minutes ago was suddenly gone, replaced by a cautious businessman. "I believe you, Madeline, but proving a judicial fraud case takes weeks. Proving the audio recording is authentic and navigating the federal money laundering allegations takes months. Right now, legally speaking, you are an incapacitated individual. You have no access to your equity. You cannot legally authorize a retainer agreement, and I cannot finance a massive federal war against a billionaire CEO on credit." He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. His tone was dismissive and final. "Come back to me when you can clear the conservatorship. Until then, my hands are tied." The paralegal gently but firmly escorted me out of the corner office. I walked down the long, silent corridor, feeling entirely numb. The elevator doors opened and I descended to the ground floor in a state of pure shock. I stood alone in the center of the lavish law firm lobby. The imported Italian marble floor gleamed under the recessed lighting. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed against a few crumpled bills. I pulled them out. 2 50s and a single $100 bill. $200. I looked up at the massive digital clock displayed on the lobby wall. It was ticking relentlessly. The NovaTech initial public offering was scheduled to launch in exactly 48 hours. In 48 hours, Preston would take my company public, launder his syndicate money, and erase my legacy forever. I was completely locked out of my own life. I had no access to my millions, no legal representation, and no safe place to sleep. All I had was $200 a piece of bricked hardware and a burning, desperate need to tear Preston's world apart. I stared at the 2 crumpled $50 bills and the single 100. My entire net worth, a lifetime of relentless work and brilliant engineering, had been reduced to paper currency I could hold in one fist. Panic is a biological response. A sudden rush of cortisol demanding either fight or flight. I refused to do either. I folded the bills, slid them back into my coat pocket, and pulled out the untraceable burner phone. I was standing in the cold, cavernous marble lobby of Vance and Sterling. The security guards were eyeing me from the front desk, likely wondering why a woman in a dust-covered suit was staring at a blank digital clock on the wall. I turned my back to them and dialed the only number I knew was secure. DeAndre answered on the first ring. He froze the accounts. I stated, my voice echoing slightly against the imported Italian stone. "All of them. He used a forged medical power of attorney from my hospitalization 5 years ago. The litigator will not touch the case without a $200,000 retainer, and I am officially locked out of the traditional banking system. I have exactly $200 to my name." A low, rumbling chuckle came through the speaker. It was not a sound of defeat. It was the sound of a master chess player who had accurately anticipated his opponent's opening move. "Preston thinks sequentially," DeAndre said, the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard echoing in the background. "He attacks the visible infrastructure. He attacks the bank accounts attached to your social security number and your primary corporate profile. But he completely forgets who audited the blockchain architecture for NovaTech's initial beta launch 3 years ago. I closed my eyes, taking a sharp breath, as a sudden wave of realization washed over me. The ghost node, I whispered. Exactly, DeAndre replied. When we were stress testing the encrypted ledgers for the offshore clients, I told you to siphon a fraction of your early developer dividends into a decentralized, air-gapped crypto wallet. No names, no corporate KYC protocols, no ties to the American banking system whatsoever. Just a pure cryptographic hash sitting on a decentralized ledger waiting for a rainy day. Do you remember the seed phrase? I did not need to write it down. I had hard-coded the 24-word sequence into my own memory, burying the words under layers of childhood addresses and favorite book quotes. I remember it, I said. Open the secure browser on the burner phone, DeAndre instructed. Access the ledger. The market has been incredibly kind over the last 3 years, Maddie. You do not just have enough for a legal retainer. You have enough to buy the damn law firm. I tapped the URL into the encrypted browser on the cheap plastic device. I entered the seed phrase, my thumbs flying across the digital keyboard with practiced precision. The screen loaded, authenticating the biometric handshake DeAndre had manually routed through the burner's cellular signal. The balance populated on the screen. It was not displayed in dollars. It was in Bitcoin. And the conversion rate staring back at me was over $4 million in completely untraceable, highly liquid capital. Preston's county court freeze meant absolutely nothing in the decentralized financial world. He had tried to lock me in a cage, completely unaware that I held the master key to a vault he could not even perceive. I am going back upstairs, I told DeAndre. Make them bleed, he replied and cut the connection. I turned around, walked straight to the executive elevator bank, and slammed my hand against the call button for the top floor. The steel doors slid open, and I marched down the corridor with a completely different posture. The junior paralegal leaped out of her ergonomic chair as I bypassed her desk, shouting that Mr. Vance was done for the night and that security was on their way. I ignored her. I threw open the heavy oak doors to Marcus Vance's corner office. Marcus was standing by his vintage bar cart, pouring a measure of bourbon into a crystal glass. He froze his brow, furrowing in intense irritation as I invaded his sanctuary. I believe I was very clear about my terms, Madeline, Marcus said coldly, setting the crystal decanter down on a silver tray. I do not run a charity, and I do not need one, I countered, walking directly to his massive desk. Generate a unique wallet address for the firm's digital holding account. Right now. Marcus paused. His dark eyes dropped to the burner phone illuminated in my hand, then flicked back up to my face. The annoyance vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, calculating gleam of the apex predator I had initially sought out. He did not ask questions. He simply pressed a button on his desktop intercom. Sarah, bring the firm's encrypted ledger tablet in here, Marcus commanded. The paralegal scurried into the room, shooting me a nervous glare before handing Marcus a heavy military-grade tablet. He generated a secure QR code and placed the screen flat on the desk. I scanned it with the burner phone, authorized a transfer of $200,000 in Bitcoin, and paid the maximum network fee to expedite the block confirmation. 10 seconds later, Marcus's tablet chimed. The funds were secured, irrevocable, unfrozen. I am no longer an incapacitated individual, I stated, staring him down across the mahogany wood. I am your client, and you work for me. Marcus let out a slow, appreciative breath. He picked up his bourbon, took a sip, and sat down in his leather chair. Take a seat, Madeline. Let us look at what you brought me. I sat across from him and pushed DeAndre's encrypted flash drive forward. Marcus plugged it into a secure air-gapped terminal explicitly designed for viewing sensitive corporate data. He typed in the decryption key I provided. The screen instantly populated with the offshore ledgers, the Cayman Island shell companies, and the raw transactional data proving Preston and Serena had been laundering international syndicate money using NovaTech's proprietary software. I watched Marcus's face as he scrolled through the raw data. I expected him to immediately reach for his desk phone to call the federal prosecutor. I expected him to begin drafting the emergency injunction to stop the initial public offering scheduled for Friday morning. Instead, his scrolling slowed to a deliberate crawl. He leaned closer to the high-definition monitor reading the exact timestamps on the financial transfers. The ambient light of the screen reflected in his eyes. He sat back, lacing his fingers together, a terrifying silence descending over the luxurious office. "This is flawless," Marcus murmured, his voice tight with genuine professional awe. "They have tied their own personal signatures to the holding companies. They have routed illegal funds directly through the primary servers that will be subjected to federal auditing the moment the company goes public. This is a textbook RICO violation bundled with massive securities fraud. So we file the injunction tomorrow morning," I said, leaning forward. "We take this to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we arrest him before the IPO launches." Marcus slowly shook his head. He looked across the desk at me, a predatory smile stretching across his face, exposing teeth. "We don't just sue them, Maddie," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, thrilling pitch. "We let them ring the IPO bell, and we let them commit federal fraud on live television." The massive flat-screen monitor in Marcus Vance's corner office illuminated the room with the bright, sterile glow of a morning financial news broadcast. The ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed rapid updates on global markets, but the main segment was entirely dedicated to the upcoming NovaTech initial public offering. Sitting on the plush studio couch, looking perfectly composed and completely untouchable, were Preston and Serena. Preston wore a tailored navy suit minus the tie, projecting the exact image of a relaxed, brilliant Silicon Valley visionary. Beside him, Serena was dressed in a sharp slate-gray dress, her posture exuding corporate authority. They were smiling. They were charming the anchors. And they were systematically executing a public execution of my character on live national television. The lead anchor leaned forward, adopting an expression of faux concern. "Preston, there have been rumors circulating in the financial sector over the past 24 hours regarding some internal friction. Whispers of a dispute with your wife, Madeline, who is listed as a co-founder. Can you address the stability of the company heading into Friday's launch?" Preston's smile faded, replaced by a masterclass performance of deep, heavy sorrow. He looked down at his hands, shaking his head slowly before looking back into the camera. "It breaks my heart to even discuss this publicly," Preston said, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. "But transparency is the core value of NovaTech. My wife is currently suffering from a severe, prolonged mental health crisis. She is completely estranged from reality right now. We have tried for months to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs, but her condition has deteriorated into violent manic episodes and extreme paranoia." Serena placed a comforting hand on Preston's arm, turning her sharp gaze to the anchor. "Madeline is an incredibly tragic case of vindictive jealousy," Serena stated, her voice smooth and clinically precise. "She contributed absolutely zero code to the actual NovaTech architecture. She handled early administrative tasks, but as Preston's genius propelled the company to a billion-dollar valuation, her resentment grew. She simply could not handle being sidelined by his brilliance. Now in a state of severe mental unwellness, she is actively trying to sabotage American innovation out of pure spite. We have had to take emergency legal steps to protect the company and its investors from her delusions." I stood frozen in Marcus's office, staring at the screen, as my husband and his partner erased my existence. They were not just stealing my company. They were rewriting history to paint me as a hysterical, incompetent burden who was finally being locked away for everyone's safety. Marcus took a slow sip of his black coffee, his eyes fixed on the broadcast. "Let them talk," he murmured. "The deeper they dig this hole, the harder we bury them in it." But the damage was instantaneous. By noon, the social media backlash hit like a tidal wave. My phone, safely connected to Marcus's secure firm Wi-Fi, began vibrating relentlessly with alerts. The internet had mobilized. Tech forums, financial blogs, and social media platforms were completely saturated with the narrative Serena had spun. Vicious, misogynistic vitriol flooded my notifications. Thousands of self-proclaimed tech bros and venture capitalists rallied around Preston, elevating him to the status of a martyr. They doxed my previous addresses. They spammed my professional profiles with hateful comments. I watched in real time as strangers called me a gold-digging parasite, a crazy ex-wife trying to extort a true genius, and a toxic liability who deserved to be institutionalized. They demanded I be thrown in a padded cell so the IPO could proceed without interference. If the television interview was the spark, my mother-in-law provided the gasoline. Just hours after the morning broadcast, Beatrice appeared as a surprise guest on one of the most popular lifestyle and true crime podcasts in the country. The host was notorious for deeply emotional, biased interviews, and Beatrice played her like a cheap instrument. Marcus pulled the live audio feed up on the office speakers. Beatrice's voice echoed through the room, breathy, fragile, and trembling with fake tears. "I lived in absolute terror in my own son's home," Beatrice sobbed into the microphone. "Madeline was so abusive. She controlled every aspect of Preston's life. She would fly into these terrifying screaming rages if he received any public credit for his software. She was deeply schizophrenic, always hiding things, always convinced we were out to get her. We tried to love her. We tried to welcome her into the family, but she was a monster. My poor son has been a victim of domestic emotional abuse for years. It was a flawless, coordinated media siege. They were completely distracting the public and the financial regulators from the reality of the impending IPO by offering them a juicy, scandalous narrative of a crazy, abusive wife. They were establishing public consensus to justify the emergency medical conservatorship. I sank into the leather chair opposite Marcus's desk, feeling the sheer suffocating weight of their coordinated attack. I was officially a villain in the court of public opinion. Then the secure encrypted phone sitting on Marcus's desk rang. It was the direct line we had established with DeAndre. I hit the speaker button. "Are you watching the circus?" DeAndre asked, his voice low and tight with adrenaline. "They are everywhere," I replied, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "They are doing a media tour to legitimize the conservatorship. Let them enjoy the cameras," DeAndre said, the rapid, relentless clacking of his mechanical keyboard transmitting through the speaker. "Because their arrogance just gave me the blind spot I needed. They are so busy managing the PR fallout and prepping for the bell-ringing ceremony that nobody is actively monitoring the deep-level encryption on the Cayman servers." "What did you find?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, instantly all trace of his relaxed demeanor vanishing. "I cracked the final encryption key on Serena's offshore routing tunnel," DeAndre stated. "I isolated the exact shell corporation they are using to funnel the laundered cash into the NovaTech equity pool. It is a holding company registered as Apex Vanguard Limited." Marcus froze. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, chilling realization. "Read that name again," Marcus demanded. "Apex Vanguard Limited," DeAndre repeated. Marcus exhaled a sharp, heavy breath, raking a hand over his face. "That is not a standard tax evasion shell, Madeline. That is a known entity." "What does that mean?" I asked, looking between the speakerphone and Marcus. "Who does it belong to?" DeAndre's keyboard stopped clicking. The silence on the line was deafening. "It belongs to the Sinaloa Syndicate," DeAndre said, his voice devoid of all emotion. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. "They are not just washing money for greedy venture capitalists or corrupt politicians," DeAndre continued. "Preston and Serena are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars in raw narco capital through your software. They are laundering blood money for an international cartel. And if that IPO goes live on Friday morning, that cartel gains legitimate clean equity in a publicly traded American tech company." I stared at Marcus, taking in the sheer audacity of his strategy. He did not just want to win a civil dispute, he wanted a public execution. I nodded slowly, feeling a cold, hard smile mirror his own. We would let them build their own scaffold. The next morning, the media offensive began. Marcus had relocated DeAndre and me to a secure, heavily guarded executive suite in a hotel adjacent to his firm, ensuring our physical safety while the legal machinery operated in the shadows. We sat in the dim light of the suite, watching the massive flat-screen television. Preston and Serena were sitting on the brightly lit set of the Global Market Morning Report, the most watched financial news program in the country. They looked like the absolute pinnacle of Silicon Valley royalty. Preston wore his signature understated luxury, a dark sweater and expensive blazer, while Serena radiated sharp, clinical professionalism in an immaculate white suit. The lead anchor leaned forward, folding his hands on the glass desk, with an expression of manufactured gravity. Preston, the markets are incredibly bullish on NovaTech's Friday IPO, but we have to address the elephant in the room. There are aggressive rumors regarding your co-founder and wife, Madeline. Reports suggest she is attempting to halt the launch. What is the reality here? Preston looked directly into the camera. He manufactured a deeply convincing expression of profound sorrow. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair, looking every bit the exhausted but resolute leader. "It is the great tragedy of my life," Preston said, his voice thick with rehearsed modulated emotion. "I love Madeline. I always will. But the woman I married is currently lost to a severe mental health crisis. We have spent months trying to get her the psychiatric intervention she so desperately needs. Unfortunately, her condition has spiraled into extreme paranoia and violent manic episodes. She is completely disconnected from reality right now." Serena placed a highly visible, comforting hand on Preston's arm. She turned to the anchor, her face a mask of corporate stoicism and gentle pity. "It is a heartbreaking situation," Serena stated smoothly. "Madeline contributed early administrative support to NovaTech. But as Preston's brilliant architectural vision propelled us to a billion-dollar valuation, she simply could not cope with being overshadowed. Her current actions are driven by pure vindictive jealousy. She is an estranged, mentally unwell wife, actively attempting to sabotage American innovation out of spite. We were forced to pursue a medical conservatorship simply to protect the company, its employees, and our thousands of investors from her delusions. I watched them smoothly erase my genius, my code, and my sanity on live national television. They were weaponizing my stolen legacy to build public consensus for their fraud. The impact was instantaneous and utterly devastating. By noon, the public backlash struck with the force of a hurricane. DeAndre had set up a monitoring matrix on his secondary laptops, capturing the real-time sentiment across major social media platforms. The glowing screens reflected a digital lynch mob. Tech forums and financial message boards exploded. Thousands of anonymous venture capitalists and software developers immediately rallied to Preston's defense. He was their martyr. I was the hysterical, bitter ex-wife trying to destroy a visionary. My old social media profiles were flooded with relentless venom. Strangers branded me a toxic parasite. They called me a gold digger who contributed nothing to the codebase. Prominent tech influencers posted aggressive video diatribes demanding I be institutionalized so the IPO could proceed without my interference. They celebrated Preston for making the hard, agonizing choice to lock away his unstable wife for the greater good of the free market. If the morning broadcast lit the match, Beatrice poured gasoline directly onto the fire. Early that afternoon, Preston's mother appeared as an exclusive guest on one of the most widely downloaded true crime and lifestyle podcasts in the country. DeAndre routed the live audio feed through the suite's high-fidelity sound system. Beatrice's voice filled the room, trembling with perfectly timed synthetic sobs. "I lived in absolute daily terror of that woman," Beatrice cried into the microphone, taking a shuddering, dramatic breath. Madeline was so emotionally abusive. She isolated Preston from his own family. She controlled his every move. Whenever he received any public recognition for his software, she would fly into these terrifying, screaming rages. She was deeply paranoid, constantly accusing us of conspiring against her. We tried so hard to love her, to get her help, but she was a monster. My poor son has been a silent victim of domestic abuse for years. I sat rigidly on the hotel sofa, listening to my mother-in-law weaponize fake victimhood to protect her son's billion-dollar theft. The sheer coordinated perfection of their smear campaign was breathtaking. They were saturating the media cycle, keeping the public, the regulators, and the investors completely fixated on the scandalous drama of a broken marriage. They were looking at the cameras. which meant they were not looking at their servers. Across the suite, DeAndre was a blur of motion. He sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by 3 high-powered laptops, completely ignoring the media circus playing out on the television. His fingers struck the mechanical keyboard in a furious, relentless rhythm. The screens flashed with cascading lines of code, complex decryption algorithms, and offshore server nodes. Preston and Serena thought they had locked me in a cage. But their arrogant media tour had given DeAndre the exact blind spot he needed to operate undetected. "Got you," DeAndre whispered, his voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the television broadcast. I stood up and walked over to his workstation. The primary monitor displayed a complex glowing web of financial routing tunnels. "They are entirely distracted by the PR rollout," DeAndre said, his eyes darting across the rapidly scrolling data. "They left the secondary firewall on the Cayman servers operating on an automated protocol. I just cracked the final encryption key on Serena's primary offshore routing tunnel." He hit a final keystroke and a specific corporate registry file popped onto the center of the screen in stark white text. "I have isolated the exact shell corporation Serena is utilizing to funnel the laundered cash into the NovaTech equity pool," DeAndre stated, pointing at a highlighted block of text. "It is a holding company registered as Apex Vanguard Limited." I stared at the name. It sounded like a standard generic corporate entity designed for mundane tax evasion. But DeAndre's face was completely devoid of his usual confident swagger. He looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. "What is it, DeAndre?" I asked, feeling a sudden chill ripple through the warm suite. "Who owns Apex Vanguard?" He turned the laptop slightly so I could read the underlying beneficiary data he had managed to decrypt from the offshore registry. "This is not a standard venture capital slush fund," Matty DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a low, tense register. "This specific shell corporation belongs to the Sinaloa Syndicate." The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. "They are not just washing money for greedy executives or corrupt politicians." DeAndre continued, pulling up the massive, staggering transactional volume on the secondary monitor. "Preston and Serena are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars in raw narco capital directly through the NovaTech software architecture. They are laundering blood money for an international cartel. And when that IPO goes live on Friday morning, that cartel is going to own clean, legitimate equity in a publicly traded American tech company." The flashing strobe lights of the paparazzi line illuminated the grand entrance of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Tonight, the iconic building had been transformed into the impenetrable fortress of the NovaTech pre-IPO Tech Gala. Serena had sent a courier to my hotel room just hours prior with a mocking VIP invitation and a handwritten note telling me to come see what real success looked like and to wear something cheap. Instead, I stepped out of the black town car wearing a breathtaking custom crimson silk gown. The fabric hugged my frame perfectly before cascading down the marble steps like liquid fire. The heavy diamond collar resting against my collarbone was genuine, a piece borrowed from a private vault Marcus Vance maintained for his highest-tier clients. I raised my hand to brush a perfectly styled curl away from my face, using the motion to adjust the microscopic flesh-colored earpiece hidden inside my right ear. "Audio check." DeAndre's voice crackled softly but clearly in my ear. "Signal is locked. Agent Harris and the SEC Cybercrime Strike Team are parked in the utility van directly across the street. We have a direct, undetected tap into the museum's internal network. I have a visual on the target." Agent Harris's gruff voice chimed into the encrypted channel. "Remember the parameters, Madeline. We believe the offshore data. We know the cartel money is moving, but Serena's corporate structure gives Preston too much plausible deniability. We need him caught red-handed. You have to bait him into accessing the stolen code's primary server from the localized terminal inside the VIP lounge. We need him to execute a live wire transfer using his personal biometric login. Once he authorizes that transfer, we have him on wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. Do not break character." "I hear you," I murmured, my lips barely moving. I turned my attention to the museum entrance. I walked up the crimson carpet with slow, deliberate precision. The murmurs began immediately. Industry insiders, venture capitalists, and tech journalists parted like the Red Sea. Their eyes darted wildly between my immaculate appearance and their glowing phone screens, where Serena's morning smear campaign was still trending heavily. I kept my posture rigid and my chin high, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying certainty. Madeline. The sharp voice cut through the ambient jazz music spilling from the open museum doors. I stopped at the top of the stairs. Preston and Serena were standing at the entrance of the grand foyer. Preston wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo, his handsome face instantly twisting into a meticulously practiced mask of patronizing concern. Serena stood beside him in a severe, structured black gown, her eyes flashing with pure, unrestrained malice. Flanking them were my mother-in-law Beatrice and my sister-in-law Brittany. I had to force myself not to laugh at the sight of Preston's family. Beatrice and Brittany were practically sinking under the weight of massive, ostentatious diamond necklaces and matching tennis bracelets that caught the camera flashes like disco balls. They were the kind of jewels that cost more than a large suburban house. I knew their financial reality intimately. Neither of them had that kind of liquid capital. They had purchased those stones on massive, high-interest lines of credit, leveraging their anticipated payouts from tomorrow morning's IPO. They were spending cartel blood money before the opening bell even rang. "You actually showed up," Beatrice sneered, stepping forward and looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "I am honestly shocked the psychiatric ward let you out for the evening. Did you rent that dress, Madeline? Or did you steal another credit card to fund your pathetic delusions?" Brittany giggled loudly, sipping her champagne and leaning into her mother. "It is honestly just sad," Brittany added, raising her voice to ensure the nearby cluster of reporters could catch every word. "She cannot handle the fact that Preston built a billion-dollar empire completely without her, so she comes here to beg for a handout. Someone should really call an ambulance before she hurts herself." "Madeline, please," Preston said, lowering his voice into a tone of gentle, husbandly sorrow. He took a half-step forward, holding his hands up placatingly. "You are unwell. You should not be here. You are embarrassing yourself in front of the entire industry. Let me call a private car to take you back to the clinic where it is safe." Serena did not bother with the fake sympathy or the public relations performance. She snapped her manicured fingers immediately, signaling the towering head of private security who stood near the velvet VIP ropes. "Remove her." Serena commanded the security chief, a wall of muscle stuffed into a tight black suit. "This woman is legally incapacitated and is currently trespassing at a private corporate function. Throw her out onto the street immediately. Use force if she resists." The security chief nodded sharply and stepped directly into my path, flanked by two other massive guards. They formed an intimidating physical barrier between me and the entrance to the gala. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises right now," the chief said, reaching out a thick hand to grasp my bare arm. The crowd of onlookers fell dead silent. Cell phone cameras lifted into the air from every direction, ready to capture the highly publicized violent breakdown of the crazy ex-wife. Beatrice smiled triumphantly. Preston shook his head in mock pity for the cameras. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not flinch away from the guard's massive hand. I calmly reached into my crimson designer clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy legal document. It was bound by a dark blue ribbon and stamped with a raised, undeniable federal seal. I slapped the document directly against the security chief's broad chest with a sharp, echoing thwack. He reflexively grabbed the thick stack of paper, his frown deepening in confusion as his eyes caught the bold red lettering of the United States Federal Court. "Read the first paragraph," I instructed, my voice ringing out clear and perfectly steady over the quiet crowd. "That is an emergency federal court injunction signed by a district judge exactly 40 minutes ago. It explicitly and permanently suspends the fraudulent medical conservatorship filed in county court." The security chief scanned the legal document, his eyes darting rapidly across the text. His face immediately drained of all color. He looked from the imposing federal seal up to my face, his aggressive, intimidating posture instantly dissolving into pure panic. I took one deliberate step forward, forcing him to hold his ground. "I still legally own 83% of the equity. If you deny me entry to a shareholder event, this entire IPO is legally voided right now. And you will personally be named as an accessory to federal securities fraud." The security chief looked over his shoulder at Preston. He looked at Serena's furious face. Then he looked back down at the federal injunction trembling slightly in his massive hands. He swallowed hard, took a very deliberate step backward, and gestured toward the open doors. The guard stepped aside. The heavy oak doors of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art swung open. I stepped over the threshold and left the cold night air behind, entering a cavernous room glowing with ambient blue light and dripping with unimaginable wealth. The main atrium had been transformed into a temple worshipping at the altar of NovaTech. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with trays of vintage champagne. Billionaire venture capitalists, tech journalists, and Silicon Valley elites mingled beneath a towering digital display that projected the NovaTech logo in a continuous, mesmerizing loop. "You are in," DeAndre said, his voice a tight whisper in my right ear. "Harris has agents covering every exit. The museum network is completely compromised. I have full access to the audio-visual controls. Just give me the signal." "Hold your position," I murmured, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, simply to keep my hands occupied. "Let them take the stage." I moved through the crowd like a ghost wrapped in crimson silk. The murmurs followed in my wake. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. They all recognized me from the morning broadcasts. I was the vindictive, deranged wife who had allegedly tried to destroy her husband's brilliance. People parted to give me a wide berth, their eyes wide with a mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine shock. I did not break my stride. I walked directly toward the center of the atrium, positioning myself at the base of the main aisle leading up to the grand stage. The ambient music faded into a dramatic, pulsing electronic beat. The lighting shifted, dimming across the crowd and converging into two brilliant spotlights on the stage. Preston and Serena emerged from the wings. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Preston offered his signature humble wave, perfectly playing the role of the reluctant genius. Serena stood beside him, radiating absolute dominance. She stepped up to the acrylic podium and tapped the microphone. "Welcome, everyone." Serena's voice boomed through the massive speaker system, smooth and commanding. "Tonight is not just a celebration of NovaTech. It is a celebration of the relentless spirit of American innovation. Tomorrow morning, when the market opens, we will change the digital landscape forever." The crowd cheered again. I stood perfectly still at the back of the center aisle, my eyes locked on Preston. He was smiling, soaking in the adulation, completely oblivious to the federal strike team waiting outside the walls. "But we are not just ringing a bell tomorrow," Serena continued, her tone rising with manufactured excitement. "We are launching the next evolution of our infrastructure. Tonight, right here on this stage, Preston will initiate the transfer of our entire operational database to our new proprietary decentralized server network. This is the architecture that will secure NovaTech for the next century." "That is it," Agent Harris barked in my earpiece. "That proprietary server is the offshore tunnel. The moment he hits that transfer protocol, he is manually bridging the cartel accounts to the corporate ledger. We need him to do it on camera." Preston stepped up to the podium beside Serena. A sleek digital console had been set up next to the microphone. He placed his hand over the biometric scanner. A green light flashed, illuminating his face. "Initiating the primary sequence," Preston announced, pressing the central command key. A massive digital countdown clock appeared on the towering LED screens behind them, ticking backward from 60 seconds. The crowd began to clap in rhythm with the pulsing numbers. "Go, Harris," commanded in my ear. I stepped into the center aisle. I did not walk cautiously. I strode forward with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. The crimson silk of my gown snapped around my legs. The crowd parted instantly, the rhythmic clapping faltering as people caught sight of me marching directly toward the stage. Preston noticed me first. His confident smile shattered. His hands gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, his knuckles turning instantly white. Serena followed his gaze. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom, but she quickly recovered, leaning into the microphone to power through the interruption. "As the countdown continues, let us take a moment to thank our incredible board of directors," Serena projected, her voice tightly controlled. I did not stop. I reached the base of the stairs and began to ascend. Madeline Preston hissed, forgetting the microphone was live. His voice echoed across the silent room, laced with sudden naked panic. I reached the center of the stage, standing mere feet away from them. Serena shot me a look of absolute murder and opened her mouth to speak again, preparing to publicly humiliate me or call for my removal. I did not give her the chance. I opened the custom NovaTech administrative app on my phone. It was a backdoor protocol I had written myself 3 years ago that Serena had never possessed the technical skill to find. I tapped a single command. Serena's microphone went completely dead. She tapped the metal grill, a harsh acoustic thud echoing uselessly. She glared at me, her chest heaving with silent rage. "Security," Preston yelled, waving his arms frantically toward the wings of the stage. "Get her out of here right now!" "Security!" 2 guards rushed forward from the shadows, but they froze halfway across the stage. The security chief I had encountered at the door appeared behind them, grabbing them by the shoulders and shaking his head violently. He held up his hand, signaling them to stand down. He had read the federal injunction. He knew touching me was a federal crime. Preston looked from the paralyzed security team back to me, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The countdown clock behind us hit 10 seconds. "What are you doing, Maddie?" Preston demanded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You are destroying everything." "I am fixing the code," I replied coldly. "You always did have trouble with the back-end architecture." 5 seconds, DeAndre's voice crackled in my ear. I looked Preston dead in the eyes and pressed the final execution command on my phone screen. The digital countdown clock vanished. The massive NovaTech logo disappeared entirely. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the hundreds of elite investors and journalists in the crowd. The towering LED screens behind the stage suddenly illuminated with the stark, highly encrypted interface of the Cayman Island offshore banking servers. The name Apex Vanguard Limited flashed in massive red letters across the top of the display. Below it, thousands of lines of transactional data began scrolling in real time. The screen explicitly broadcasted the exact offshore routing numbers, the massive deposits of illicit cartel cash, and the automated laundering protocols transferring the funds directly into NovaTech's legitimate corporate accounts. The absolute silence that gripped the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind that precedes a devastating explosion. Every single eye in the cavernous atrium was locked onto the massive LED screens behind the stage. Instead of the sleek, minimalist NovaTech logo they had expected to applaud, they were staring at the raw, unfiltered reality of a global criminal enterprise. The name Apex Vanguard Limited pulsed in harsh red letters, dominating the room. Below it, thousands of lines of raw transactional data cascaded downward. The numbers were staggering, millions of dollars moving in real time, flashing rapidly as the automated laundering protocols routed illicit cash through offshore accounts directly into NovaTech's equity pool. Then the room exploded. The stunned silence shattered into a chaotic cacophony of gasps, shouts, and frantic murmurs. The hundreds of venture capitalists, tech journalists, and industry elites suddenly realized they were not witnessing a software glitch. They were staring at a live confession of high-level financial treason. The reporters in the front rows instinctively raised their professional cameras and smartphones, the blinding flashes illuminating the stage like a violent lightning storm. Preston's meticulously crafted mask of the visionary genius completely disintegrated. His face drained of all color, leaving him looking sickly and hollow under the harsh stage lights. He spun around, his eyes wide with sheer panic as he took in the scrolling ledger of his own criminal conspiracy. "Shut it down!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. He lunged toward the acrylic podium, his manicured hands slamming violently against the master control console. "Cut the feed! Cut the power right now!" He hammered his fists against the emergency kill switches, desperately trying to plunge the stage into darkness. The digital console blinked uselessly under his assault. Nothing happened. The massive screens continued to broadcast the damning offshore routing numbers, the glowing digits reflecting directly off Preston's terrified face. He is completely locked out. DeAndre's voice hummed smoothly in my earpiece, accompanied by the rapid, satisfying clack of his mechanical keyboard. I have a hard override on the museum's entire audiovisual matrix. He cannot even turn off a light bulb in that room without my permission. Let him burn Maddie. Beside the podium, Serena was frozen. The icy, untouchable corporate dominatrix was entirely paralyzed. Her eyes darted frantically across the scrolling code, her sharp mind instantly calculating the inescapable reality of their situation. She recognized the specific routing tunnels on the screen. She knew I had found the exact digital arteries she had built to wash the Sinaloa cartel's blood money. Her hands began to shake, the expensive champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering loudly against the polished stage floor. I did not give them a moment to breathe. I raised Serena's dead microphone to my lips. With my other hand, I tapped a single override command on my customized phone app, instantly routing the microphone's audio feed through DeAndre's hijacked secure network. Testing, I said. My voice boomed through the museum's massive state-of-the-art speaker system, drowning out the escalating panic of the crowd. The sheer volume and authority of my tone demanded absolute attention. The room immediately quieted down, a collective hush falling over the elite audience as they turned their undivided focus to the woman in the crimson gown standing at the center of the stage. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, esteemed venture capitalists and future shareholders, I announced, my voice ringing with cold, lethal clarity. What you are watching on the screens behind me is not a proprietary server upgrade. It is not a glitch. You are looking at a live, unedited view of the Cayman Island routing node for an offshore holding company known as Apex Vanguard Limited. Preston took a step toward me, his face twisting into a mask of feral rage, but the security chief instantly stepped between us. The massive guard crossed his arms, planting his feet firmly on the stage. He had read my federal injunction. He knew exactly who legally owned this company, and he was not about to become an accessory to a sinking ship. Preston collided with the guard's chest and bounced back, looking utterly powerless. For the past 18 months, the CEO and CTO of NovaTech have not been building a revolutionary digital infrastructure. I continued, pointing directly at Preston and Serena. They have been operating a highly sophisticated digital washing machine. That scrolling data proves that Preston and Serena have been funneling hundreds of millions of dollars in raw narco capital directly into NovaTech's corporate accounts. They are actively laundering money for the Sinaloa syndicate, trading clean, publicly traded American tech equity for illegal offshore cash. They use this blood money to artificially inflate our billion-dollar valuation, deceiving every single investor in this room to secure tomorrow's initial public offering. The reaction was visceral. Total pandemonium erupted across the ballroom floor. Prominent billionaire investors dropped their champagne glasses and frantically pulled out their phones, screaming at their brokers to pull their funding immediately. Tech journalists were shouting into their recording devices, narrating the greatest corporate collapse in Silicon Valley history, live to their news desks. Near the front of the crowd, my mother-in-law Beatrice and sister-in-law Brittany stood entirely paralyzed. The smug, condescending sneers they had worn just minutes prior were completely gone. They clutched their massive, ostentatious diamond necklaces, their faces contorted in absolute horror as they realized the glittering jewels around their necks were financed by an international drug cartel. Their leveraged high society dreams were evaporating in real time, replaced by the terrifying specter of federal asset seizure and criminal complicity. "It is over, Preston," I said, lowering the microphone and looking directly into his panicked, desperate eyes. "You stole my company, but I am the one burning it to the ground." "Breach in 3, 2, 1, DeAndre stated sharply in my ear. The heavy oak doors of the museum's grand entrance burst open with a deafening crash. A flood of tactical gear, windbreakers, and flashing badges poured into the atrium. Federal agents. "Nobody move," a voice roared over a megaphone, cutting through the chaos. Dozens of armed federal marshals and SEC cybercrimes agents stormed the ballroom, instantly securing the perimeter. The crowd scrambled backward, creating a wide, terrified path as the strike team marched straight down the center aisle. Flashing cameras from the press went absolutely wild, the strobe lights illuminating the sheer terror on Preston and Serena's faces. Agent Harris led the charge, storming up the stairs and stepping onto the stage. He did not look at me. He walked directly up to Preston and Serena, flanked by 4 heavily armed marshals. Preston Vance and Serena Sterling, Agent Harris, declared, his voice echoing loudly across the stunned, flashing ballroom. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate racketeering, and international money laundering." The heavy metallic click of handcuffs snapping tightly onto Preston and Serena's wrists echoed sharply, sealing their fate directly in front of the flashing cameras. The metallic click of the handcuffs seemed to echo through the massive atrium, cutting clearly through the chaotic din of shouting reporters and panicked investors. Preston Vance, the untouchable Silicon Valley visionary, stood completely frozen. His bespoke velvet tuxedo instantly wrinkled under the firm, unyielding grip of the federal marshal holding his arm securely behind his back. The arrogant, charming smirk that had defined his public persona for years was entirely obliterated. In its place was a slack-jawed expression of absolute, unadulterated terror. Beside him, Serena fought like a cornered animal. She thrashed violently against the agents securing her wrists, her pristine white suit now rumpled and disheveled. She kept screaming for her corporate lawyers, demanding that someone confiscate the cameras flashing relentlessly in her face. But the tech journalists she had spent months manipulating were merciless. They crowded the edge of the stage, eager to capture every single second of her spectacular downfall. I stood perfectly still, the crimson silk of my gown catching the harsh glare of the camera flashes. The heavy diamond collar around my neck felt like armor. I watched my husband, the man who had stolen my code, orchestrated my public humiliation, and tried to strip away my sanity, being marched toward the exit like a common criminal. Preston locked eyes with me as the marshals forced him forward. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to try one last desperate manipulation to save himself. Agent Harris shoved him firmly toward the stairs. "You have the right to remain silent," Harris barked over the deafening noise. "I highly suggest you start using it immediately." The crowd parted for the tactical team, a sea of horrified faces, watching the billion-dollar NovaTech empire collapse into dust. Then a piercing, hysterical screech ripped through the room. "Madeline." I turned my head slowly. Pushing violently through a cluster of stunned venture capitalists was my mother-in-law, Beatrice. Her perfectly coiffed hair was coming undone, strands flying wildly around her flushed face. The massive, ostentatious diamond necklace she had bought on credit swung erratically against her chest. She looked completely feral, entirely stripped of her refined society matron facade. Trailing right behind her was Brittany, tears streaming down her pale face, her phone clutched desperately in her trembling hand. Brittany had likely just checked her banking apps and realized the federal asset freeze had already locked down all of NovaTech's affiliated accounts, instantly freezing the massive lines of credit they had used to fund their lavish lifestyles. Beatrice broke past the final line of spectators and lunged directly at me. Her hands were curled into claws, her eyes wide with unhinged fury. "You vicious, ungrateful parasite!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. Before her manicured hands could even graze the fabric of my gown, DeAndre materialized from the shadows, stepping smoothly between us. He did not touch her, but his imposing physical presence and cold, unyielding stare forced Beatrice to skid to an undignified halt. "Stand down, ma'am," DeAndre stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Do not make me call those marshals back in here for you." I placed a gentle hand on DeAndre's shoulder and stepped around him, closing the distance between Beatrice and myself. I was not afraid of this woman anymore. I had spent years cowering under her subtle insults, her passive-aggressive cruelty, and her relentless belief that I was entirely unworthy of her golden child. Now, standing in the ruins of the empire she thought her son had built, I only felt a cold, clinical pity. "Let her speak, DeAndre," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the murmuring crowd. The press was eagerly shifting their cameras from Preston's dramatic exit toward our confrontation, hungry for every drop of the family drama Beatrice herself had ignited earlier that morning. Beatrice pointed a trembling, diamond-encrusted finger right at my face. "You planned this. You orchestrated this entire circus just to destroy him because you could never accept that he was a genius and you were nothing." "He is a thief," Beatrice, I replied, my tone conversational and almost bored. "And now he is a federally indicted money launderer facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary." "He is not going to any prison!" Beatrice shrieked, her face turning a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. The cameras flashed continuously, capturing every bead of sweat on her forehead. "You think this little stunt changes anything? You think you have won because you got a few agents to crash a party? My son has the best legal defense team in the state of California. They will not represent him for free," I reminded her smoothly, "and the SEC just froze every single liquid asset tied to NovaTech. Preston does not have the money to buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone retain a premium defense firm." Beatrice threw her head back and let out a harsh, triumphant laugh that bordered on manic. "You really are exactly as stupid as Serena said," Beatrice sneered, stepping closer, her breath hot and frantic. "I am bailing him out. We just put our $3 million family estate up for collateral to a private bail bondsman this morning. We secured a massive line of credit just in case your little legal tantrums caused any temporary delays. You will not win. He will be out on bail by midnight and he will completely crush you. You will pay for ruining my son." Brittany sobbed louder in the background, frantically tapping her dead phone screen. "Mom, the cards are declining. Everything is declining." Beatrice ignored her daughter, keeping her venomous gaze locked entirely on me. "We own the estate outright," Beatrice boasted, her voice echoing off the marble pillars. "The bondsman already approved the transfer of the deed. We have the capital to fight you until you are begging on the streets." I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer weight of her arrogant confession hang in the air. The reporters in the front row were furiously typing on their tablets. Beatrice had just publicly admitted to leveraging her only remaining clean asset to fund the defense of an international money laundering conspiracy. I looked at the woman who had spent a decade treating me like dirt on her designer shoes. I looked at the glittering unpaid diamonds around her neck. Then I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. I took one step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. I smoothly stepped completely out of her reach, brushing an invisible speck of dust from my crimson silk gown. "You did not read the name of the parent company holding your collateral, did you?" "Beatrice," I whispered, my voice chillingly calm and carrying the absolute finality of a loaded gun. The harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the Philip Burton Federal Building offered no place to hide. The polished marble floors echoed with the squeak of tactical boots and the hushed, frantic whispers of defense attorneys. I sat perfectly composed on a wooden bench at the back of courtroom 4B, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that radiated absolute control. 3 rows ahead of me sat the remnants of the Vance family dynasty. Beatrice, Richard, and Brittany looked as though they had aged a decade overnight. The designer clothing they had worn to the museum gala was now deeply wrinkled. Beatrice clutched a leather handbag against her chest, like a life preserver, her eyes bloodshot and manic. Richard sat rigidly beside her, his face a pale, sickly gray, while Brittany furiously chewed on her thumbnail, her phone entirely useless since the federal asset freeze wiped out their data plans. The heavy side doors groaned open and the entire courtroom fell dead silent. Preston was escorted in by 2 armed United States Marshals. The tailored velvet tuxedo was gone. In its place was a drab, oversized orange jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were bound in heavy iron shackles that clinked humiliatingly with every shuffle he took toward the defense table. His pristine hair was matted with sweat. He looked directly at his mother, his eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for salvation. Beatrice offered him a frantic, trembling nod, patting her leather handbag reassuringly. Judge Eleanor Caldwell entered the room, her expression carved from stone. She slammed her gavel once the sharp crack cutting through the tension. The federal prosecutor, a towering man with a razor-sharp gaze, immediately took the floor. He outlined the staggering scope of the NovaTech money laundering operation, the offshore accounts, and the direct ties to the Sinaloa syndicate. Preston's defense attorney, a notoriously expensive corporate shark, stood up to counter. He flashed a confident, polished smile. "Your Honor, the defense formally requests bail." The attorney stated smoothly, "My client is a respected figure in the tech community with deep ties to San Francisco. He is not a flight risk. Furthermore, his family has secured a private bail bond. His parents, Beatrice and Richard Vance, have fully leveraged their unencumbered $3 million primary residence as collateral. The deed transfer has already been conditionally approved by the bonding agency. We request immediate release pending trial. Beatrice sat up straighter, shooting a venomous, triumphant glare over her shoulder at me. She truly believed her generational wealth was an impenetrable shield. Judge Caldwell looked over her reading glasses, turning her attention to the federal prosecutor. Does the government object to the proposed bail package? The prosecutor did not just object, he dropped a tactical nuke on the entire room. The government vehemently objects, Your Honor. The prosecutor declared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. As of 6 a.m. this morning, the Department of Justice filed superseding indictments against Preston Vance and Serena Sterling. The charges now officially fall under the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. Richard slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The defense attorney's confident smile instantly evaporated. The prosecutor continued hammering the final nails into Preston's coffin. Under RICO statutes, the federal government has executed immediate and total asset forfeiture protocols. This includes all corporate holdings, offshore accounts, and any personal property that directly or indirectly benefited from the laundered funds. Financial forensics confirm that the Vance family estate, the very property offered as collateral today, was renovated and maintained using illicit capital funneled through NovaTech. Judge Caldwell nodded grimly. The estate is contaminated. It is fully seized by the federal government. Your Honor, the prosecutor confirmed. The property cannot be used as collateral. Furthermore, due to the extreme flight risk and the defendant's proven access to international cartel networks, the government requests that Preston Vance be remanded to federal custody without the possibility of bail. Judge Caldwell did not hesitate. The gavel fell with a deafening crack. Bail is denied. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals Service. This hearing is adjourned. No, Beatrice shrieked, leaping to her feet. You cannot do this. We put up the house. We signed the papers. The marshals grabbed Preston by the arms, forcibly turning him away from his screaming mother. Preston thrashed wildly against his restraints, his voice cracking in sheer panic. Mom, do something. Preston begged, his voice echoing tragically as he was dragged toward the holding cells. Call the bondsman. Get the money. 10 minutes later, I stood in the expansive marble hallway outside the courtroom. DeAndre stood beside me, holding a sleek black briefcase. The heavy wooden doors burst open and Beatrice, Richard, and Brittany stumbled out, looking completely shell-shocked. Beatrice spotted me immediately. The grief in her eyes morphed instantly into blinding, irrational rage. She charged forward, her fists clenched, fully prepared to unleash physical violence. You did this! Beatrice screamed, her voice hoarse and broken. You tipped off the feds about the house. But it does not matter. The bonding agency already processed the loan against our equity. We will hire new lawyers. We will fight the seizure. I held up a single manicured hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. You are severely misunderstanding your current financial reality. Beatrice, I said, my voice smooth, cold, and cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. DeAndre popped the latches on his briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, pristine legal document and held it out. Richard, trembling uncontrollably, reached out and took the paper. When you drove to that discreet address at 2 a.m, desperate for a $3 million shadow loan, you signed a highly aggressive, predatory contract, I explained, watching the color drain from Richard's face as he read the fine print. You agreed to terms that stipulated an immediate, non-negotiable default if the collateral was subjected to federal freezing seizure or any form of criminal litigation. Beatrice blinked, her manic energy faltering. So what? The government has the house. The loan is void. The collateral is void. Beatrice, I corrected sharply. The debt is not. The moment Judge Caldwell slammed her gavel and initiated the RICO freeze, your loan went into catastrophic default. The penalty clauses you failed to read triggered immediately. I stepped closer, commanding her complete attention. You owe $3 million payable immediately in full, I stated, my tone merciless. And because you are now federally flagged under a RICO investigation, no bank on the planet will restructure that debt. Who holds the paper? Richard choked out, his eyes scanning the bottom of the document. Who is Apex Capital Lending? DeAndre offered a sharp, lethal smile. I am, I replied, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I created that shadow firm 3 years ago to manage NovaTech's overflow capital. I own the debt, I own the penalty clauses, and I just executed the foreclosure notice on everything else you own to cover the outstanding balance. Brittany let out a loud, terrifying sob, sinking to her knees on the marble floor. You are bankrupt, Beatrice, I said, stepping around her frozen, trembling form. The federal government took your son, but I took your legacy. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before my private security firm physically removes your belongings to the curb. I did not look back as I walked down the long corridor, the sound of my heels masking the sound of a dynasty shattering behind me. The marble hallway of the federal courthouse was still ringing with Beatrice's hysterical sobs as Brittany scrambled backward, her hands shaking violently. She did not stay to comfort her mother or support her father. Survival instinct, entirely selfish and utterly frantic, kicked in. She turned and fled the building, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stone floors. Pushing her way through the revolving glass doors, she spilled out into the blinding San Francisco sunlight. She pulled out her phone to summon a private black car, her fingers swiping aggressively at the screen. A stark red notification glared back at her. The ride-sharing application had suspended her account due to multiple declined payment methods. She tried another app. Suspended. Her platinum credit cards tethered directly to the Vance family's sprawling web of NovaTech accounts were entirely frozen. A wave of pure suffocating panic washed over her. She was a Vance. She did not take public transit. She did not walk. Desperate, she flagged down a battered yellow taxi, sliding into the worn vinyl back seat and barking her address at the driver. She would have to empty her emergency cash stash from her vanity just to pay the fare. 30 minutes later, Brittany burst through the double doors of the luxury high-rise condominium she shared with her husband DeAndre. The sprawling penthouse with its panoramic views of the bay had always been her sanctuary, a place where she played the role of the progressive, wealthy socialite. DeAndre, she screamed, slamming the heavy door behind her and dropping her useless purse onto the marble entryway table. DeAndre, where are you? She found him in the master suite. He was not pacing. He was not watching the news broadcast that was currently tearing her family's legacy to shreds. He was standing calmly by the massive walk-in closet, meticulously folding a designer suit and placing it into a sleek black leather duffel bag. What are you doing? Brittany shrieked, marching into the room with her arms flailing wildly. Stop packing for a business trip. We have an absolute catastrophe. Madeline is a psychotic monster. She just set up my parents. The feds took Preston. They seized the estate and they froze all our accounts. DeAndre did not stop folding. He placed a pair of dark denim jeans into the bag, his movements unhurried and precise. I am aware, he replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that contrasted sharply with her manic screeching. You need to call your bank right now, Brittany demanded, stepping directly into his line of sight to force his attention. You need to liquidate everything. Pull out your retirement accounts, sell your tech stock options, and take out a loan against your salary. My parents have exactly 24 hours to vacate the estate. We need to secure a high-end luxury apartment for them immediately, somewhere in Pacific Heights. And we need cash to wire to Preston's defense attorneys because the assets are locked. DeAndre slowly zipped the main compartment of his duffel bag. He finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a cold, unyielding intensity that made her instinctively take a half-step backward. No, he said simply. Brittany blinked, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. What do you mean, no? DeAndre, did you not hear a single word I just said? My family is about to be homeless. My brother is in a federal holding cell. You make a fantastic salary as a senior engineer. We need your money. This is an emergency. Your family is a criminal syndicate. Brittany, DeAndre stated, his tone completely flat. And their emergencies are no longer my problem. How can you be so incredibly selfish? Brittany shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of ugly, entitled rage. We are talking about family loyalty. We brought you into this family. We gave you a seat at our table. You would be absolutely nothing without the Vance name elevating your status. You owe us everything. DeAndre let out a short, dry laugh that lacked any trace of humor. He picked up his bag and slung the heavy strap over his broad shoulder. A seat at the table, DeAndre repeated, tasting the bitter irony of her words. You mean the table where your mother asked me to fetch her coat the first time I met her, because she assumed I was the valet? Or do you mean the table where Preston called me a diversity charity case, right to my face during our engagement dinner, and you sat there and giggled into your champagne? Brittany waved her hands dismissively, entirely unbothered by the cruelty of her own history. You are being ridiculously sensitive. That was years ago. It was just a joke. They are from a different generation. DeAndre, we accepted you. We looked past your background and your upbringing to welcome you into high society. You have to stand by us now. I do not have to do a single thing for people who spent 5 years treating me like a prop, to prove how progressive they were, while simultaneously looking at me like I was dirt on the bottom of their shoes. DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. Your mother hated my skin color. Your brother hated that I was smarter than him. And you only loved that I was a quiet, hard-working accessory who let you play the wealthy patron. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He held it out between his index and middle finger. Brittany stared at the envelope, her chest heaving with frantic breaths. What is that? The bail money? DeAndre dropped the envelope. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy, definitive thud right at the tips of her designer heels. Those are divorce papers, he stated, his face devoid of any emotion. Fully expedited. My legal team filed them this morning while you were busy watching your brother get dragged away in shackles. Divorce. Brittany gasped, the last remaining pillars of her reality collapsing around her. You are leaving me today. You cannot do this. You are just a mid-level engineer. You cannot afford this place without my family's backing. Where are you even going to go? DeAndre paused at the bedroom doorway. He turned his head slightly, a razor-sharp, victorious smile finally breaking across his face. You never actually paid attention to what I did for a living, Brittany, he said smoothly. I was not just some mid-level engineer. I am the architect who helped Madeline build the back door into NovaTech's servers. I am the one who locked Preston out of the audiovisual system at the museum. And as of this morning, I was just appointed the new vice president of cybersecurity at Apex Ventures by Madeline herself. Brittany's knees buckled. She crumpled to the floor, her hands flying to her mouth as the sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over her. He had been working with Madeline the entire time. He had helped burn her family to the ground. My starting salary is 8 figures, DeAndre whispered, his voice chillingly calm and cutting through the dead silence of the room. But I do not fund racists who treated me like dirt. He turned his back on her, walking out of the master suite and out the front door, leaving Brittany sobbing hysterically alone on the floor of a penthouse she could no longer afford. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system ground NovaTech into dust within a matter of months. There was no prolonged, sensationalized trial to keep Preston and Serena in the public eye. The mountains of encrypted data DeAndre and I had systematically handed over to the Securities and Exchange Commission left their defense attorneys with absolutely no leverage. Faced with thousands of pages of irrefutable evidence detailing their international money laundering operation, their high-priced legal teams advised them to take plea deals. Arrogance, however, remained their fatal flaw until the very bitter end. They demanded their day in court, genuinely believing their innate superiority would somehow charm a federal judge. It did not. The sentencing was broadcast across every major financial news network in the country. The judge handed down a staggering 15 years in federal prison for both Preston Vance and Serena Sterling, with no possibility of early parole. There were no suspended sentences for white-collar crimes when a cartel was involved. Serena's icy, untouchable facade finally shattered completely as the bailiff approached her. She shrieked, fighting against the handcuffs, her perfectly tailored courtroom attire wrinkling as she was roughly subdued. Preston did not fight. He simply wept, his shoulders heaving as he was led out the side doors, looking terrifyingly small in his oversized institutional uniform. The former golden boy of Silicon Valley was reduced to a federal inmate number. The collateral damage extending to the rest of the Vance family was equally absolute. Stripped of their stolen millions, Beatrice and Richard faced the harsh, unforgiving reality of extreme poverty. The sprawling $3 million estate was auctioned off by the federal government to satisfy the remaining debts. I made sure my shadow firm collected every single cent owed. Their final departure from Pacific Heights was a masterclass in public humiliation. There were no professional moving companies carefully wrapping their imported antiques. There were no sleek black cars waiting to whisk them away to a luxury hotel. Instead, a battered rented U-Haul truck idled loudly in the driveway. Richard, his face gray and exhausted, struggled to carry taped cardboard boxes down the sweeping marble staircase. Beatrice stood on the sidewalk clutching a single trash bag filled with whatever cheap clothing the federal agents had allowed her to keep. Her manicured nails were chipped and broken. Her hair, once perfectly styled every morning, hung limp and graying around her face. Several former friends from her exclusive country club drove slowly past the estate in their luxury SUVs, explicitly turning their heads to avoid acknowledging her existence. The social exile was absolute. They loaded their meager belongings into the back of the rented truck and drove across the bridge toward a grim, run-down apartment complex in a forgotten industrial neighborhood. Their new reality consisted of stained carpets, peeling linoleum, and the constant deafening roar of a nearby freeway. They had nothing left but each other and their shared suffocating resentment. I watched the news report of their final sentencing from the serene, quiet comfort of the Apex Ventures executive lounge. The massive flat-screen monitor displayed Preston's weeping face on an endless, muted loop. I sat perfectly still, a cup of artisanal espresso resting lightly in my hand. I waited for the surge of vindictive triumph to wash over me. I waited for the urge to laugh, to gloat, to drive down to that miserable apartment complex just to look Beatrice in the eye one last time and demand the apology I had been denied for a decade. But the feeling never came. Instead, a profound clinical detachment settled over my chest. I felt absolutely nothing for them. The fiery rage that had fueled my meticulous planning, the deep, agonizing sting of Preston's betrayal, the suffocating weight of Beatrice's psychological cruelty, it had all entirely evaporated. I did not need to confront them. I did not need to hear them admit I had won. They were no longer villains in my story. They were simply ghosts, fading into the background of a life I had already left behind. I pressed a single button on a sleek remote, turning off the television screen, plunging the room into peaceful silence. They were erased. 3 hours later, the chaotic noise of San Francisco was replaced by the hushed ambient hum of the international terminal at SFO. I walked through the exclusive priority boarding lane, carrying nothing but a single elegant leather carry-on. The flight attendant waiting at the door of the aircraft offered a warm, professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Sterling," she greeted me softly, using my maiden name. "Let me show you to your suite." I was guided into the first-class cabin, stepping into a private enclosed suite that felt like a sanctuary suspended in the sky. The plush leather seat was massive and pristine. I settled into the quiet luxury, the ambient lighting casting a warm glow over the polished wood paneling. Within moments, the flight attendant returned, placing a crystal flute on the tray table and pouring a generous measure of chilled vintage champagne. "We will be cleared for takeoff to Paris shortly, Ms. Sterling," she murmured, before discreetly closing the privacy doors to my suite. I picked up the crystal flute, the cold glass sending a sharp grounding sensation through my fingers. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The champagne was crisp and perfect. I set the glass back down on the tray table and looked at my left hand. The heavy, flawless diamond engagement ring and the matching platinum wedding band caught the soft cabin light. For years, those rings had represented a cage. They were a symbol of submission to a man who viewed me as an asset to be managed, and a family that viewed me as a parasite to be tolerated. With a slow, fluid motion, I gripped the diamond and slid it off my finger. The platinum band followed. My ring finger felt suddenly wonderfully light. I did not put the rings in my purse. I did not slip them into my pocket to sell later. I held the millions of dollars worth of diamonds over my empty water glass and simply opened my hand. The heavy jewelry dropped against the bottom of the glass with a sharp, resonant clink. I left the glass resting exactly in the center of the tray table, a generous tip for the cleaning crew. The massive jet engines roared to life, a deep, powerful vibration that signaled forward momentum. I leaned back into the plush leather seat and turned my gaze out the wide window. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the twilight sky. The glittering, treacherous skyline of San Francisco rapidly shrank beneath me, quickly swallowed by a thick blanket of gray fog. I watched the clouds part as the plane climbed higher, breaking through into the brilliant, unobstructed light of the stratosphere. I took another sip of champagne, feeling the absolute, untouchable freedom wash over my soul. The past was dead, the empire was mine, and the entire world was finally waiting. The most profound lesson from this story is that true worth is never defined by the validation of those who refuse to see it. For years, I sought approval from people who were more invested in my failure than my happiness. I realized that my family's rejection was not a reflection of my inadequacy, but a result of their own limitations and need for control. When we stop begging for a seat at a table where we aren't wanted, we gain the freedom to build our own. Boundaries are not just for protection, they are the foundation for self-respect. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to find your true power? Share your story in the comments below.